Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and today's video is going to be a more in-depth look at the rogue changes that we've gotten. In fact, since the last time I tried to record this video, we actually have had even more changes added to rogues, mostly with legendaries. In this video, I want to take a look at what Assassination rogues are getting, what both the specs of Outlaw and Subtlety are getting, the legendaries, as well as the Venthyr Covenant change with Flagellation. Last time I checked Flagellation, it wasn't fully working, so this is PTR. There's probably going to be other builds in the future. This is just a snapshot at current PTR. Blizzard could literally release an update tomorrow, and all these changes are void. So this isn't finalized by any measure, just be aware of that. But I want to take a close, in-depth look at the main that I play, which is Rogue, and all these changes, and how they will affect your gameplay if all these changes were to come out in 9.05. We'll first start off with Assassination. Assassination actually lost a bit of a buff with Slice and Dice. Normally there's a rank 2 version of Slice and Dice in the Assassination tree somewhere in here, where Slice and Dice will give you extra energy regeneration. Blizzard has removed that energy regen completely, but now Cut to the Chase has returned. It doesn't look like Cut to the Chase is anywhere in the game as a passive for like a rank 2 of any ability, but it does exist. And what Cut to the Chase does is Envenom extends duration of your Slice and Dice by up to 3 seconds per common point spent. That means if you played in BFA, Assassination returns. Same playstyle, same feeling, with now Slice and Dice, and with this change, a lot more Envenom, so you can actually use your mastery. This is what it would look like in gameplay. We're playing a few pure single target build, Blindside, Subterfuge, Vigor, Poison Bomb. We're not looking at the damage, we're just looking at the playstyle. And enjoy. We're gonna open up with a Garrote, Ambush, Slice and Dice into a Mutilate, into a Rupture, which makes sense. Vendetta to get our energy rolling. We'll get 5 common points and watch our Slice and Dice. It has been extended. And now we can Envenom again, and now we have full Slice and Dice. Our bleeds are about to fall off. Hey, let's just refresh them. Do we need to refresh Slice and Dice anymore? You don't. You don't have to refresh Slice and Dice anymore. Basically the playstyle that you had back in BFA, but now you have the constant Slice and Dice sticking with you. Far more uptime on your Envenoms, which now finally you can... It feels so much better that way, because it always felt like, well, you have Rupture, you have a Garrote, you have Slice and Dice, and it felt like you were juggling those abilities and you weren't really being given enough opportunity to get Envenoms in there, which felt so core to the playstyle. But now with this change, you're going to have far more Envenoms in your DPS, so your mastery actually gets a lot of its value from. You don't have nearly as much of like a hard time managing all these different buffs and debuffs all at once. So overall, that's going to be an amazing change for Assassination rogues. It's not, I think, gonna directly buff their damage. I mean, it does, because you do get more Envenoms now, less uptime on having to refresh Slice and Dice. So indirectly, it does have a damage increase, but the most important part that it does is it smooths out the rotation. Don't have to worry about haste as much, don't have to worry about energy regen as much. You can actually get a lot of stuff still done, and it feels fantastic. It feels so good to play. That's probably the biggest advantage you'll see as Assassination. Another buff that Blizzard did give to Assass, this is a minor one. Venomous Wounds is supposed to now give you 8 energy per tick instead of 7, which also helps out a little bit with energy smoothness and energy regen. But yeah, I don't think that's actually in the game right now, or if it is in the game, it doesn't show up in the tooltip properly just yet. Another thing to note is a lot of rogues are trying out Venthyr, as it looks like Venthyr has gotten a few buffs, and hopefully I have footage from the last time I was testing stuff out, because there was a lot of rogues trying the Venthyr buff. Let's talk about the Venthyr buff first from the Outlaw rogue perspective, and take a look at what this buff actually is. So the buff itself is going to be to the Venthyr ability, the actual ability itself being Flagellation. Flagellation now functions a little differently. Flagellation will now have initial damage at the very start when you first use the ability. So once you press it, it will do a little bit of shadow damage out of the bat. It will also not cost any energy either, and it will last only 12 seconds. During those 12 seconds, every common point you spend into a finisher will cause an extra lash that will do more damage than it did previously with the ability. I think the initial hit is like 50% attack power, and every one of those common point per finisher attack is 10% per attack power. So initial ability of Flagellation is going to do about 1,000 damage, and if a 5 common point finisher does also overall about 1,000 damage on top of it. So the more finishers you can get out through Flagellation, that's extra 1,000 damage, or depending on how many common points you invest into a finisher, of extra dam. Also, dealing damage while Flagellation is active, and afterwards will increase your haste by 1% for 12 seconds. So you'll try and want to get a finisher as Flagellation falls off in order to make sure you can extend this buff. So how does this overall look like for your Outlaw rogue, and how does this overall feel? So we'll try giving you guys a little bit of a rundown of what this will look like and how it'll play. It's very similar to Flagellation, but the differences are you don't have to press the ability again to get the haze buff, and now it should give you the haze buff passively over time. So if you go for a basic roll the bones, get ourselves an opener, Adrenaline Rush, Flagellation into a Slice and Dice, now you can see we actually get stacks of buffs at the very beginning with Flagellation. So it's actually quite a lot of damage in terms of the haze that it provides you, because the haze buff is actually quite interesting. Although right now, does it actually give you haze? It does actually give you a haze. They fixed it since yesterday. Okay, so I got 30% haze there just now. Yesterday this wasn't working at all. And did they fix Flagellation damage? They did. So prior to this, it actually had it where Flagellation would only count 1 combo point per finisher. So basically did damage, very tiny amount of damage per finisher, because it wouldn't count each combo point separately for the finishers, but now it does. And you can see in this little opener, this ability is doing 8.5% of my damage, which is much bigger, I guess, combined together with this initial hit too. That's a little bit, I mean, that was not even a proper opener, but the ability at the start of my rotation with a very non-proper opener setup did about 13,000 damage. This is a massive buff for this ability, which has been very untuned in comparison to the other abilities. One thing Flagellation had for it is the haze buff, which seems to be a lot bigger now, and with scaling in future content, this is going to be bigger for rogues. The damage for a 1.5 minute CD in comparison to the other abilities, which are usually far shorter in CD, the damage is now a bit more proportional. What also helps out with Flagellation, if let's say you're like, okay, well, I don't even know if I really want to play Venthyr because I want a PvP, for example. One thing that could be maybe a deal breaker for you guys, or something that might sweeten the deal, is if I use Flagellation, right? So you have the initial hit and you kidney shot an enemy, the damage also applies from your kidney shots. So when you're going for this ability, Flagellation, kidney shot, mark for death, eviscerate, shadow strike, eviscerate, that damage stacks up with your burst, and it's far easier to use now. So this opens up a lot of doors and opportunities, and I think it's apt to say doors since Door of Shadows is your Venthyr ability. This opens up a lot of doors and opportunities for potential rogue Venthyr to actually be a viable solid choice, because I played Venthyr because I like the mogs, I like the ability, I like the unique aesthetic it brings. I'm a huge fan of that teleport ability because I love grapple hook, so having like an extra grapple hook was amazing for me. But now you're looking at Venthyr as an actual viable possible choice. You saw me get 30% haste pretty easily without going for a proper opener. So the haste you get can be up to 30 by the looks of it. It looks like that is the cap right now. But it'll give you around from 15 to 30 haste every time you use this ability on a 1.5 minute cooldown. And it makes certain other aspects of this ability and the playstyle for Venthyr, for example, a lot stronger, because Lashing Scars as an ability becomes a lot better. Flagellation will lash 4 times, so off the bat, when you use Flagellation, you'll get a 5% haze buff immediately, and also having that 75% damage increase makes this ability a real full cooldown to use. And for rogues in PvP, for example, when you're locking someone down in a stun, having it work off of your kidney shots just actually plays so well into this rogue playstyle, which I think could open up a door for rogues to actually be able to play Venthyr and not having to be the meme covenant, but an actual useful covenant. Haste is going to scale really well with us. That's actual shadow damage. Now the covenant, the conduit itself, could increase that damage even further. And there's still a question of, are the soulbinds good enough for PvP? But there's still a lot of good opportunities and a lot closer choices now in comparison to the other covenants. But that's the big changes that we're getting for rogues themselves. And then of course we also have legendary changes. Let's take a look at the legendary changes that rogues are getting and talk about how those will impact the different playstyles that rogues will be able to play with, the different builds, as well as what opportunities you might be able to get, or maybe opportunities lost with these legendary changes. First, let's get into legendaries that are non-spec specific, like Mark of the Master Assassin. This one is a little bit more specified now. So Mark of the Master Assassin now only affects your auto attacks and rogue ability critical strike chance. What does that mean? Trinkets don't get the benefit. External items don't get the benefit. Anything else you would use in order to buff your crit damage, so I would imagine maybe the Kyrian weapons inside of a Necrotic Wake, no longer get a benefit from that 100% crit, which makes rogues a little bit less good for Mythic Pluses, because we had some overpowered combos in Dungeon like Necrotic Wake. But it does make this legendary a little more consistent, and it takes PvE trinkets out of PvP for the most part, since you can no longer choose them with a crit chance of 100% guarantee. being able to use a bunch of PvE trinkets, or at least one, in order to guarantee yourself a massive destructive combo at a loss of that versatility PvP buff. So that's a pretty big one. We also got a legendary change with the Shiv legendary. Not a legendary that a lot of us use regularly, but I did want to test out the damage for it. So the Shiv legendary is going to be, if I can find it in my bags, Shiv deals now 500, and this is a max level Lego, 500% increased damage and no longer costs energy. So Shiv itself becomes an ability that hits for 3000 damage. So maybe if you're someone who is an assassination rogue, for example, I could totally see this ability become part of the playstyle, as Shiv does generate your combo point, and as assassination you are going to be using Shiv on cooldown, not for debuffs like you would for the other specs, but you would use it on cooldown as part of the playstyle for assassination in order to trigger that extra nature damage. I don't really know. This is an interesting one that they decided to buff, but it is a legendary that isn't getting much play, and a lot of other legendaries also have been buffed in such a way. Another legendary that also have been buffed, maybe a bit too much because there might be a typo in it, but Essence of the Bloodfang. Common point generator abilities inflict a pretty hefty bleed on the enemy over 66 seconds and healing you for 50% of that damage. So right now this is a typo where this legendary is doing way too much damage, but it's only supposed to be buffed by 30% on the actual notes. So I doubt this legendary is going to come out as broken as it is right now. I'm pretty sure there was a typo to increase the damage by like 300 instead of 30. But yeah, this legendary has also been buffed, but it's not a legendary that I think is going to become that much better, unless potentially there will be a build in the future where Rogue needs more survivability, and then the bleed for the heal could maybe sometimes be good, maybe in AoE situations. We'll have to wait and see. Next, let's get into Assassination. Back into Assass, as we were talking about some legendaries that could actually be game-changing. So let me first slip into something more comfortable for my Assassination Rogue. The legendaries we'll take a look at are going to be Doomblade, which we actually have Doomblade legendary on us. As soon as we find it, we can equip it. So Doomblade has been buffed where Mutilate now will deal 45% more damage instead of, I believe it was 30 over 8 seconds, and also will increase your Envenom damage by 5% for every bleed you have on the target. This legendary, in combination to the changes that Assassination has gotten, it's a massive ripple effect, I guess, is what I'm trying to really say here. So I'm just going to do a proper normal opener without anything crazy, and I think here you actually might not want to go for a big old slice and dice setup at all with this. And let's actually press Flagellation because we can get even more haste out of it. But here goes Envenom. We got ourselves pretty massive uptime on this slice and dice. And while we're getting bleeds up and running, you can see that extra bleed with Mutilate Flesh actually being quite good. So I'm guessing if you Mutilate crits, it could be a lot of damage over time. Every 3 seconds bleeding for extra damage, which could be really good. Look at that Envenom damage go. That was during Shiv, but that extra few percent increased damage on Envenom really makes this ability shoot up. But you can see just the damage is a lot higher with our setup. The poisons is doing quite a bit with that Envenom, and it just synergizes so well into the playstyle. We get more Envenoms, we get to use more of that legendary, we get more value out of it, so it seems really, really good right now. Another legendary we can play with is the Dustwalker's Patch, which reduces the cooldown of our Vendetta. Dustwalker's Patch is here. Remaining cooldown of Vendetta is reduced by 1 second for every 30 energy you expend. So this goes from 50 energy to 30, which means a lot less energy for you to use in order to get your Vendetta up and running, and a lot more value. So I do want to try to see if I'm just going by normal rotation, you know, nothing super try hard or crazy, but if I'm just going by normal rotation, just how fast is the cooldown of my Vendetta once I press it. So we're going to pop a normal opener into a slice and dice, into a Vendetta, and this is where we're going to press our button, get our Flagellation rolling, and get our damage in there, and just see what the cooldown of our Vendetta will look like on average, because this should shorten it quite a bit. And what's benefit of this legendary too is this could potentially maybe be good in Mythic Pluses as well, since it doesn't have to work off of Envenoms. It can be off of any ability that costs energy. Our common point generators cost energy. Our common point spenders cost energy. Just about everything you do, like Phantom Knives, costs energy. And if you can get a bunch of bleeds on enemies and, let's say, Mythic Plus AoE, and keep spinning to win with Phantom Knives and 2 Crimson Tempests back to back, that could give you a lot more Vendetta windows in the future. So we're looking at a Vendetta with higher haste values that could literally be 1 minute CD. So you're taking Vendetta from a 2 minute CD to a 1 minute with a lot better gear, and I don't have the haste necessary for this. But this is pretty good. 1 minute vendettas. I mean, that's a button where you're doing 30% more damage to an enemy. It gives you energy regen. I feel like this is a significant buff where you could consider using this legendary in niche situations. Again, Sims might come out and say that this is terrible, but to me, a vendetta 1 minute cooldown, I mean, basically it reminds me of like those essences that we used to do back in BFA, and having a vendetta on a 1.5 minute was a game changer. So imagine a rogue fully geared with a minute vendetta. This could be basically like a combustion mage but in a rogue format. This could be really, really cool. Then we have ourselves the Outlaw Rogue legendary changes. We have a couple of them that we could test with, but these are not looking super wild where we might have some meta shifts, but we don't really know. We'll see first of all with Guile Charm, which now has a massive threshold increase to 15%. So it's basically your red buff, green buff, yellow buff from your good old Outlaw Rogue of back in the day, or Combat Rogue I guess from back in the day. As we press Sinister Strikes, we need to get 4 Sinister Strikes in order to get into a green buff. So as we Sinister Strike in here, we got the green buff where we do 5% more damage. Then comes the yellow buff, which is going to happen after 4 more Sinister Strikes, and I think this does work with extra procs of Sinister Strikes. No, it doesn't. So it looks like extra procs of Sinister Strikes do not advance this buff. And now we have Moderate Insight where we do 10% more damage. And then finally the red buff, which will be the big one, 15% damage increase. That's kind of how this legendary will work. So once we have the red buff, this is where we're doing the most... Oh, it still says 10%, so I think this is supposed to say 15, so it doesn't look like this legendary works properly yet. So that is something to report on. So what's supposed to happen is during your red buff, you're supposed to do 15% damage increase. So you kind of just like climb in damage increases as you use Sinister Strikes, with the last one giving you 10 seconds of that extra damage buff. So it has a lot of ramp to it, and while a lot of people will look at that 15% damage value, even the 5% and 10% increase actually could be quite good for a spec as consistent and sustained focus as Outlaw. This one was insanely good back in the beta and alpha of the game, although it took heavy nerfs, and looks like Blizzard is giving some of that power back for this Lego in order to make it a little bit better. I wonder if this is going to be something of a better legendary going forward, and Sims will have to find out, but this definitely has some potential for a spec of Outlaw, and I think it does synergize pretty well into its sustained focus playstyle. Another legendary we have is the green skin Wickers. So between the eyes is a 20% chance per common point to increase the damage of an explicit shot now by 300% instead of 200. So we can actually see exactly how much damage this does. There's some pros and cons to this legendary, but I do want to give it a try. So now we get the proc, big ol' between the eyes, we get the buff, and pistol shot does 6,000 damage. That is not bad at all as a number. And if that crits, that's 12k. This is a pretty sizable increase for this ability. So it brings the BFA dead shot playstyle with a bit of that pistol shot bite, a little bit of that pistol shot burst to it. So that could be very, very interesting going forward. We'll have to see how the Sims are, but the damage of the pistol shot is doing 6,000 damage without any other buffs available. That's a pretty big number. That's a pretty hefty number. That's basically a finish worth of number. So that alone could maybe potentially be good in things like PvP. Another legendary that also saw a small buff is going to be Concealed Blunderbuss, a legendary that I actually been quite enjoying for PvP. They changed this one so now a pistol shot will fire 3 additional times instead of 2. That's an extra pistol shot for you to fire. For PvE purposes, this legendary hasn't been all that great, so this is going to be a direct buff for PvP as well as PvE. Again, I think it's just Blizzard trying to make those legendaries a little bit closer to one another instead of having one legendary being super far ahead of everybody else. Finally, we have ourselves Subtlety, and Subtlety has gotten a few changes for its legendaries. First one is going to be the Rotten. So with the Rotten legendary, which I actually didn't make it to test, but there's really too much to test here. After acting with Symbols of Death, your next Shadow Strike or Backstab deals a lot more damage, and that has been increased to 50% from 30. So 20% damage increase, and that ability will generate 4 extra common points. Not a bad legendary itself of a buff, but I couldn't see myself running the Rotten as a prime Lego. I think maybe Blizzard is prepping us for when these legendaries are going to be, maybe we'll be able to double up in legendaries, having 2 effects instead of just 1. And this would be a great supporting legendary, but I don't think this will be a primary one. Maybe there's some builds where you can make a big backstab build, like if you were to say to play Subtlety, potentially this could make the build of, I think it was Perforated Veins. Shadow Strike increases the damage of your next backstab by 28%, stack it up to 6 times, then going for a big backstab, or better yet, massive Gloomblade to follow up after. That could be kind of interesting, but we'll see if there's a build that comes from it. I don't think this will be enough to make the Rotten a legendary you'll run as a main, but I could be proven wrong with Sims. Then also Deathly Shadows has been buffed for Subtlety only. This legendary is actually a legendary available for all 3 specs of rogues. When you vanish, you gain 5 common points and you get 15% extra damage for 12 seconds. For Subtlety they changed it so now it's 20% extra damage for 15 seconds. Technically it's a legendary that was originally back only for Subtlety, back during beta and alpha. Then they unlocked it so other specs could use it because technically Vanish isn't only for Subtlety. But I think they're always meant for this legendary to be more inclined towards Subtlety because of how Subtlety has more of a playstyle inside of Stealth. And I think they want to make it a little bit better for Sub since you have a lot more interplay with you diving into Stealth. Or maybe this legendary is kind of behind for Subtlety only, so they wanted to buff it. But either way, this legendary is getting a buff. And again, as I said with the other one, the Rotten, this will be a great supporting legendary, but I don't know if this will be enough to make it a great primary legendary. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed this update on rogues. Today is Friday as of this video, and we will be streaming BlizzCon, so hopefully I'll see you guys later for that live stream. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts about everything happening with rogues right now, and I'll probably need to make more updated videos on rogues and other classes in the next few days, because with BlizzCon I'm pretty sure we're gonna have even bigger announcements and even more stuff coming out for us to talk about. But thank you all so much for checking out this video. Let me know what you think about these class changes for Assassination, Legendaries, and Venthyr. Do you want to go back to Assassination after these changes in 905? Because 905 is going to be in March. That's going to be very, very soon. I'm not going to be surprised if some of you guys will want to go back to the good old Assass of BFA that you used to all play. What about Venthyr? Are you considering Venthyr at all as a Covenant with some of these changes? Or are you still sticking to your Night Fae, Carrion, and your Necrolords? And Legendaries, what do you think about these? And do you think there's potential for any of these Legos to actually become playable and a viable build with them? I think there's a lot of opportunity here, especially for Assassin Outlaw. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.